Today on the Big 3 in 30, Houston falls to Iowa State in a top 10 matchup.
Houston lets this one slip away.
Kansas State gets into a legal dispute over the firing of Jerome Tang.
What is going on with Kansas State's men's basketball team?
And another offseason scandal hits BYU football.
In a similar vein to what happened to Jake Retzlaff and the Cougars this time last year.
This is the Big 3 in 30 College, the three biggest stories on campus from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The Big 3 in 30 College starts now. Thank you for making the Big 3 in 30 your first listen of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Number 2 Houston went to Ames and fell to Iowa State for the Cougars' third loss of the season and the Cyclones' second straight top 10 win. After the matchup, Parker Ainsworth has the recap on Locked On Cougs.
Houston lets this one slip away. They're up 10 with about 7 minutes to go. There's a Kingston 3 to get him to 20 points. And it feels like things are rolling. And it goes on, and there's a very controversial kicked ball call. Controversial because it was wrong. I guess that's the controversy is there's a kicked ball call that was wrong with a few minutes to go. The crowd was dead. Houston was kind of rolling. The kicked ball defeated a trap that was leading to a Houston fast break. Clearly on replay, no kick ball, but they called it. You can't review it. The ensuing sideline out of bounds play results in a immediate 3-point basket for Iowa State, and the crowd is right back in it. Now, I am not one to blame officials. Houston had several minutes to not, let that beat them, but they ultimately did, and that was the wrong call, right? And I think that's an important momentum swing in this one to keep track of. Honestly, other big part of this game, that same second half stretch, was Emmanuel Sharp, who had 16 first half points and kind of carried the load in the first half, was unavailable for large stretches over 10 minutes of the second half with his 4 fouls sitting on the bench. We're used to seeing JoJo Tugler get into foul trouble, and Emmanuel Sharp was the one in foul trouble in this one, and he is such an important part of this offense in these tight games we saw in the first half. Frankly, having that option there would have been a big benefit, especially in that stretch. There was a 10-0 scoring run where Iowa State, once Houston went up 10 to kind of even the game out over a course of time, that Houston had chance after chance after chance and couldn't get a basket. Having Emmanuel out there to get one would have been, let's just say, well appreciated. This thing was also super close and nitpicky in other spots too. The Heisey 3 in the corner that ultimately gives them their final lead there at Iowa State. He barely has enough time, if you go back and watch that, to get the ball off. He catches and releases in milliseconds. It's an awkward release with Kingston Fleming's closing out, the shot clock winding down. And, of course, it splashes at the bottom of the net. He ends up being, I believe, the second leading scorer. He had 11 points, and no one had more than 12 at Iowa State, right? He's a bench guy that's made some important plays. I don't mean to diminish his role in the team, but he's not like a guy you scout we have to shut him down, right? These several moments like this in that basketball game that just don't quite go Houston's way. And look, there were moments that did too, right? I mean, they say that this Houston had, all things were wrong. Houston had a 10-point lead on a top 10 team on the road in their place in one of the most hostile environments in America, and they just can't quite seal it. Now, I will say, I said at the start of this gauntlet, this gauntlet where you have Iowa State on the road tonight, you've got Arizona next weekend, and at Kansas next Monday, that they were going to lose one of those 3 games. If this is it, and you end up learning from this and winning 2 big ones next weekend, it may feel off or not. I do think, though, that at the end of the day, you're going to feel like you probably should have had this one because you were up 10 in the driver's seat at the 7-minute mark, and you just couldn't quite finish it. You couldn't quite seal the deal. I thought Miles Houston played really, really well in large stretches of the night tonight. His missed free throw at the front end of a 1-and-1 at kind of a need to get points kind of possession for Houston really proved monumental because of the way that the rest of the game shaped out after that. And so it's just one of those things where it's like this, and he's an over 80% free throw shooter this season. It's just these little itty bitty things that just add up, and that's how you lose these super close matchups. Now, in the big picture, yes, you let one slip on the road. I guess technically that means you're tied for first in the Big 12 with Arizona as opposed to having the outright first place shot, which makes next Saturday that much more important, right? And all kinds of chaos around that. And you're competing for a 1 seed. You want to be a 1 or a 2 so you can get into the South Regional and go through Houston and all that. Those are all big, 3,000-foot looking issues. And a very micro issue, though, like the things that were wrong with this team would have been also wrong with this team had that Heisey shot missed and they made one more three. Right? Like the big picture things there would still have been there, and it's hard to like mask and cover that up in each of these things. I got people flying in with comments here. Talking about refereeing, heartbreaking loss, momentum killing, kick ball call. 10 in a row with less than 6 minutes left, calling a timeout. Samson always last class. They had several stop balls. The 10-0 run, though, to me was not, the 10-0 run to me at the end with the stop ball, the deal there to me was not that they weren't getting good shots or weren't getting offense. They weren't making shots, and that was a really big problem. I look at, though, like what's going to call in a timeout. You only got a couple left at that point. You want to have them for some drawn up sets as they tried to draw up there at the end to lift Sanak and attack with Flemings when Fleming slipped down. The possession we haven't really talked about yet. Houston is down 2. And I guess I should point out, after the Milo Smith free throw, Houston is down 2 and elects not to foul with 43 seconds left. And JoJo Tucker gets a block. Houston gets the rebound. They have about 20 seconds, like 19.5 seconds left with the ball and a timeout. They used one of those timeouts that they did not use earlier and drop a play. And the play attacks Flemings off of a phantom screen. It lifts Chris Sanak for some spacing. And Fleming slips. They're he just slips. Initially, I was like, did he get tripped? The TV angle was kind of awkward with some different fans back their heads and stuff like that. And maybe he got slightly tripped by a little bit shoelace here or there, whatever. But that's not really the problem. Problem is he falls down. Ball goes loose. Houston can't come up with it. I guess Sanak kind of like tries to flip a shot up or something, and it doesn't work, right? And then I would say gets the ball back. You foul. They missed the free throw, but Lipsy gets the rebound. That's all downhill from there. And this one's going to hurt because it was so winnable, and there's going to be so few teams that have the opportunity to say that about a road game in Ames, Iowa. You really had a chance to do something special out there. And I don't think that means that this team can't do special things. There's a chance that they, again, win at Arizona and win versus Arizona and win at Kansas. And we're saying, like, man, they learned their lessons in Ames, Iowa, and went on to win things. Remember the last time Houston lost at Iowa State, what happened the rest of Big 12 play that season, right? It was back in 2024, but Jamal Shedd had one of the all-time great years the rest of the year. This is obviously later in the season, mid-February. That one was early January, but it does feel like this suddenly creates an opportunity to learn from it. It also, I think, several people pointing out, but Alan just typed it in, so I'm pull his name up here. It kind of makes those two games feel like you got to get at least one, if not both of them. You certainly, if you want to win the conference, need to beat Arizona to kind of get the head-to-head matchup and get the one game up there. As daunting as that may seem, you do get them at home. We know how well Houston plays at Fertitta. Kansas is not the Kansas of old, but they're not the Kansas of bad days either. And you don't know what you're going to get out of Darren Peterson, all that on a big Monday. And you know that Fogg adds about 10 points or whatever they're doing. That's going to be a challenging game. Suddenly Saturday feels like a lot bigger deal because, again, you should have won that one.
The Winter Games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for the events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. And that's why following the Winter Games on FanDuel makes so much sense. From medal counts to individual events, finding your angle on the sports you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to all the action. It's the building drama of curling matches, races decided by inches or fractions of a second. Both popular and niche events become must-watch when you're fully locked into the competition. The Winter Games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game.
Welcome back to the Big 3 and 30 College. Kansas State basketball fired Jerome Tang last week with cause, which has started a legal dispute between the coach and the school. To take a look at how this could play out, here's Christian Raw with Locked On Kansas State.
What is going on with Kansas State's men's basketball team? Gene Taylor, of course, firing Jerome Tang, for cause. And of course, we're going to dive into this one. Sam, thank you so much for being on the show. Look, right off the bat, this has been wild. I have gone and told my viewers, I think this is pretty light, the reason that he has been terminated. But of course, I don't have a professional background in this. Before we dive into some of this deep standard, the wording and things of this nature, what is your overall take of this? Is this the same feeling as you? Do you feel like this is a light reason for termination of cause?
Yeah, first of all, Christian, thanks so much for having me on. And I would tend to agree. It was definitely a little surprising. It was definitely a lot surprising when Kansas State announced that they were going to be firing him for cause. It didn't really seem like he did anything that was really that bad or really anything close to what you normally see, coaches getting fired for cause for, which is usually, some kind of NCAA scandal or, some personal life scandal. Nothing really like that. I mean, yes, it was kind of, directly after this press conference where he said some things that maybe he shouldn't have said about his players, but nothing that, at least in my experience, at least from what I think all of us have seen, nothing that would normally rise to the level of being a for cause type of termination. But clearly Kansas State disagrees.
The Mercury reported this initially, that he was going to be terminated for cause. And in their article, they mentioned three of the clauses of his contract, starting with the 9th clause. And in the section, they quoted, quote, conducting themselves at all time in a manner consistent with the position of head coach, an instructor of student athletics, and an ambassador and representative of Kansas State Athletic in the university. And then with the 10th and 11th, it's basically the same thing, establishing, maintaining, and enforcing standards of conduct, disciplinary rules and sanctions, fairly and uniformly for the team's student athletes to ensure academic and moral integrity while encouraging excellence. And then just the 11th, it says that Jerome Tang must be engaging in and actively monitoring to ensure the program's coaches and employees are engaging in fair and safe, responsible treatment of the team's student athletes in avoiding behavior, actions, and activities that could jeopardize a student athlete's welfare, health, or safety. Sounds a little broad, of course, in the case of things like this. The Cincinnati comments are the one that Gene Taylor reported on in the press conference on Sunday night, and those ones were saying that these players don't deserve to wear the uniform, and stating that they will no longer be here next year, most likely, meaning they will enter the transfer portal and not be a member of this squad. Do you feel like those comments fit into this clause right here?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head by calling it broad, because that's exactly what it is. It's incredibly broad language, and it really ties into kind of the claim that's being made by Kansas State in all this, which is to say he breached his contract. He didn't do what he was supposed to do under the contract. Yes, obviously the contract is overall to be the head coach of the men's football or the men's basketball team, but it's also something where, there's all these different ways of kind of aligning with that contract. And they're saying that, by ridiculing these players, by attacking these players in this way, that breached the contract. But the language is so broad that it gets to the point of being a little bit ambiguous and being a little bit really hard to kind of decipher and hard to kind of pin down exactly what it means to breach that contract. And I think there's a lot of different ways you can kind of look at it because of that. And that's usually a recipe for a very difficult legal fight if you're the one trying to argue breach of contract, because you really have to argue that it is a breach of contract. And especially if you look at later and, some of the other clauses in the contract and what you're really kind of relying on in the termination clause, which is a material breach of the contract, which is beyond just breaching the contract in some small degree. It means like you would not have hired this person if you'd known he was going to do this, which may be a bit of a stretch.
It definitely feels like we're looming for a legal battle. That has been reported that Jerome Tang is going to be fighting this. He has hired legal counsel, and we're going to talk about in just a minute what that might look like. Just in your past experience, you've been covering this for some time. You follow sports laws. You mentioned you're an ex-lawyer. We talked about that here. Have you seen anything remotely close to this, or at least in this degree? Because again, it feels light, but it also feels almost unprecedented that they're doing this at this moment in time. I hate using that word, but it feels like that is, after what happened in 2020, I feel like that word is just so weird now. But what is your thoughts on this? Have you seen anything remotely close?
Every once in a while you see something like this where, I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but every once in a while you see a team try to kind of dangle that for cause kind of language. In fact, I'm blanking right now. There's one that comes to mind vaguely that it actually just happened in the past year where they very quickly reversed course and said, "Oh, we're actually not going to fire you for cause because we just don't feel like it's supported, and maybe we didn't think you were going to fight it. I don't know." But it's just kind of crazy to think, because of course they're going to fight it. There are millions of dollars at stake here. And again, every once in a while, something like this comes up where you want to try it. And really most of the time it's mostly just a negotiation tactic. It's a way to kind of say, well, we're going to hold you to this. We're going to say it's for cause. We're going to take you to court, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, except there's really maybe no intention. I don't know what's in Kansas State, what's in Gene Taylor's head right now, but there's no real intention of actually going to court. It's just a way to, try to get some leverage in order to negotiate that buyout down instead of having to pay the whole thing up front.
This might actually help with exactly what you're saying right there. On Monday, it was also reported that Gene Taylor asked, or I guess gave the option to Jerome Tang that he could finish the season and then resign after the year. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Jerome Tang said the only reason, through his lawyers, he said the only way he would do that is if he received the full $18 million. And then, of course, they went this route with termination for cause. So it kind of sounds like where you're going at, they're making this reasoning. They're going for this legal battle because they're looking for a settlement.
Yeah, and that's definitely not going to help matters if it does get to court. Being able to say, well, we would have kept you, or we would have kept you on for the rest of the season and allow you to resign, because that's not something where it's a material breach of the contract. If it's a material breach of the contract, you want them gone right away. So allowing them to kind of resign on his own terms probably hurts them a little bit if this gets to court. But again, I just don't think this is actually going to get into court.
Yeah, I'm with you as well. And the fact that they let him coach one more game as well, that's something that came up during the press conference. He didn't have a great answer. I feel like Gene Taylor didn't have the best press conference, let alone. Would it have helped Gene Taylor, before we get into this, we'll move on just a second, would it have helped Gene Taylor during that press conference to just read a public statement and not take any questions instead of actually letting reporters ask questions? Because I feel like that almost made it look worse for Kansas State.
Oh, definitely. I mean, both from a public relations standpoint and a legal standpoint, because all of those statements are going to be admissible as statements against interest. But and again, that probably doesn't matter at the end of the day, because again, I very much doubt that this is going to go to court, or maybe there's a lawsuit filed, but certainly not go to trial. But even kind of just from a public relations standpoint, just allowing reporters to kind of poke holes in it and really kind of drive the wedge into it. This is why you see, whenever you have pending litigation or potential litigation, people just refuse to comment and say, I can't comment on pending or prospective litigation because I don't want to say anything that's going to hurt my case. And I didn't exactly hear what Gene Taylor. I didn't listen to the whole press conference, but yeah, from what you're telling me, it sounds like it probably would have been a lot better for him to just make a public statement and move on.
The Winter Games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for the events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. And that's why following the Winter Games on FanDuel makes so much sense. From medal counts to individual events, finding your angle on the sports you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to all the action. It's the building drama of curling matches, races decided by inches or fractions of a second. Both popular and niche events become must-watch when you're fully locked into the competition. The Winter Games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game.
Welcome back to the Big 3 and 30 College. For the second straight offseason, scandal has hit the BYU football team. Receiver Parker Kingston is no longer with the school as he faces rape charges, and Locked On Cougars host Jake Hatch joined Drake Toll on Locked On Big 12 to give us the details on the story.
We will start with Parker Kingston. The BYU football team rocked by scandal once again this offseason, and in a similar vein to what happened to Jake Retzlaff and the Cougars this time last year. Then, Richie Saunders, torn ACL, out for the season. And finally, we'll end the show with, these are two major storylines in the Big 12. They both happen to the same team in 72 hours. Where does BYU go from here in both football and men's basketball? If you hit subscribe, we get to keep our jobs. Again, thank you for making these shows your first listen every single day. Ho, Jake, man. What would you pay to go back to like last Wednesday? Just put it in reverse.
Quite a bit.
Yeah. Let's start with the Parker Kingston story, and let's start like over a year ago. This is something that BYU has said it did not learn about until very recently. When does this whole thing actually start?
So the allegations allegedly happened February 23rd of 2025. So going back nearly a year ago, that's when this alleged incident took place down in St. George, Utah, which is about 3 hours south of Provo. And Drake, honestly, came seemingly out of left field. And that's the crazy thing about this, because I can tell you, when the Jake Retzloff stuff dropped last May, in fact, that felt like it came out of left field. But for the second straight offseason, BYU football, as you mentioned, rocked by scandal, rocked by a major piece. In this case, Parker Kingston's already out of school. He's already been kicked off the football team. He is gone. So, yeah, the football program, not in a good way right now, understandably so.
This seems to have parallels, obviously, to the Retzlaff situation, but where I don't draw parallels, that's the most alarming piece. The first one being Retzlaff was still on the team, like had the option to remain on the team and be suspended and take his lumps that way. Why was this handled differently? Well, why is Parker Kingston immediately off the roster from what you're hearing?
So this one is a criminal case. The other one, while it did involve allegations of sexual assault, it was a lawsuit. It was not a criminal legal matter. It had already been looked at by the Provo police. They had passed on filing charges. This one, there's first-degree felony charges associated with it, and I can tell you that's a hard and fast no thank you from BYU to obviously put up with that. And it's unfortunate because Parker Kingston was on his way. He had a 1,000-yard season this past year. It was looking like he was going to be one of, if not the face of the BYU wide receiving core next year, alongside some really top talent like Bear Bachmeier and LJ Martin on BYU's offense. It's a gut punch for this football program, because he was a guy who looked like he was ready to take yet another step in his football career. And criminal charges, that's just something that BYU will not tolerate. And they obviously shoved him off and said, hey, you're gone.
I mean, this is huge for the Big 12 because you lose one of the best receivers in the conference, not just last year. He was very underrated in the Big 12, and he would have been maybe the best going into next season. But as big of a storyline as it is for the Big 12, it's shocking for BYU to go through the same thing. Feel like you're going through the same thing, but amplified, worse. And Jake, I don't want to speak for you, but I think you would echo similar sentiments. In a situation like this, my thoughts, my prayers are with everyone involved. The victim coming first, the alleged victim coming first here. And that display of love is the same thing I said about the Jake Retzlaff case. And you know what? The alleged victim there, whether she was ultimately lying or misconstrued or whatever it was, she deserves your thoughts and love too. That's at least what I believe. That's what I subscribe to. And so my thoughts are with those who are involved in this case, and it seems much different. My thoughts are with Parker Kingston's fiance or ex-fiance that was announced publicly a week before this news dropped. Jake, so many storylines to go with in this one, but let's talk about the abruptness that you just mentioned. Again, he announced his engagement at a BYU basketball game. This just didn't seem like the guy. I mean, Retzlaff in that same vein, as Parker Kingston had a series of off-the-field issues where you say, you know what, that guy had secrets or nuggets leading up to this?
No, none of that. Here's the thing, Parker. The one thing I knew about him is he liked to golf. That's what I knew about him, Drake. He's a scratch golfer for all intents and purposes. Best golfer on BYU's football program. I had no notion whatsoever this is a guy who had off the field issues, because he is always, to my knowledge before this, had kept his nose clean. And obviously in retrospect, that appears to not be the case here. That's why I said it came so out of left field, because there was not a notion in my brain that Parker Kingston was going to be hit with felony rape charges and find himself in an inmate's uniform down there in 5th District Court and having to pay $100,000 in bail.
Is there a chance that Parker Kingston ever suits up for BYU again?
I'd be hard-pressed to say he does, because I just don't know that, unless it's complete exoneration. We're talking this woman recants, whatever it takes for complete exoneration of him. I just, that's the only way that I see a path back to him playing for BYU. And in fact, I'd be hard-pressed to think he's going to play for another football program with this type of charge or charges being levied against him.
As we've learned in cases like these, there are rare cases the NCAA moves quickly. They moved very quickly with Jake Retzlaff. They ensured he could play for Tulane. If it is found that he's never met this person, all allegations are unequivocally physically false. Certainly that'll be a different story. But as we learned with Retzlaff, there's a lot to get through. What if it's an honor code violation? There's so many questions to ask as it pertains to BYU. Jake, before we go into Richie Saunders, man, double whammy today. This news with Parker Kingston. If you're Kalani Sitake, I mean, what do you do? Where do you go? How do you deliver this news to your team for the second consecutive year?
I think you get them in the same room and say, guys, understand that what we have here at BYU, and the reason why they have the as stringent an honor code as they have, Drake, at BYU, is to prevent stuff like this from happening. And that's got to be Kalani's message to you guys. Guys, if you follow the rules we set out for you here, guess what? None of it is going to be affecting you. And yes, there are instances where people make major mistakes. Yes, that does happen. But, man, you got to understand, guys, that this is a situation for the second straight offseason. We have had one of our star players fall by the wayside because they couldn't live up to the standard we have set in this program. Stick to the standard and understand that what we're doing, we're having a lot of success. Don't screw it up.
That's all for the Big 3 and 30 college. If you follow pro basketball or football, the Big 3 and 30 has shows for the biggest news in the NBA and NFL going up every weekday just like this one. Just search the Big 3 and 30 NBA or the Big 3 and 30 NFL wherever you're listening or watching now. Thanks again for tuning into the Big 3 and 30 college.